Welcome to another episode of the Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Lisa Olszewski, who is a chiropractor, naturopath, and keto nutrition fanatic, known to travel across the world to meet friends for dinner and rack up frequent flyer miles. When she's not adjusting spines in her chiropractic office, she's passionately making healthy living simple through her online courses, virtual summits, and one-on-one coaching, so everyone can achieve a vibrant level of health. Dr. Lisa was featured in the documentary A Better Way in 2020. She also recently made history in the state of Michigan by becoming the first female president of the Michigan Association of Chiropractors. You can download her latest hacks to better living at drlisao.com. Welcome to the show, Dr. Lisa.
Hello. It's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us your story. As many of us do, you had a dark night and that brought a transformation. So
don't you think that's how it is? I feel like doctor means teacher, right? And so sometimes what we go through is what helps us the most with our patients. So, and so much, especially as a woman, like I'm going to be straight up honest with your listeners. It was one of those things that I always felt judged. Didn't feel skinny enough. I didn't feel pretty enough. I didn't feel whatever it was. And then as a doctor that was sitting here teaching my patients, like, hey, you need to eat clean. You need to do this, eliminate sugar. And I was that girl. I was eating like paleo and low carb, like keto type stuff, like early 2000s, right? That was before it was ever became a big, sexy term. I was doing CrossFit. And I was struggling with my weight. I was struggling to be like a size 12 to 14. And when I would talk to my patients to say, this is how you should eat, like, let's eliminate out the sugar, I felt super judged because I felt like they looked at me saying, really? Like, you're fat. Like, you really don't eat sugar? And I'm like, I haven't had sugar in 10 years. Like, no, I don't eat sugar. So this has been 5 years ago now. It was a struggle of me, first off, trying to find my own, like, just being okay with who we are. Yes. But in that, it was when intermittent fasting was really a new thing. I don't want to say it was new. Like, we've been fasting for, thousands of years, but it was becoming a bigger thing within the online world. And there were a lot of male bloggers talking about it. So I did super strict intermittent fasting. I was following several huge name male bloggers. I was doing actually really super low calorie, even though I was kind of doing keto at that point, but super, like, all the wrong things to do. And with it, I lost weight. It was great. I lost weight. I lost my health. It was the perfect storm. Like, it tanked my hormones. I didn't have a period for months. The worst thing, as a woman, I lost chunks of hair. And so at that time period, I didn't even, I didn't wear my hair down for over a year because I was scared to death. Like, what happens if the wind would blow? These people would see these bald spots on my head, right? Like, it's like, as a woman, it hits us all in the gut. Like, that's our femininity. Like, you lose your, like, oh my God. So I realized, like, obviously I didn't do this right. Something's wrong here. But the worst point was that these guys, if you're listed, like, at that point, it was like, oh no, ladies, you're just doing it wrong. Like, it was always like, if you weren't having the results the men were having, the ladies just obviously were doing it wrong. And then it was this very well-known blogger whose wife started going through these things. And that was all of a sudden, he started saying, holy smokes, I think women need to do it different. Well, of course we have to do it differently. Our hormones are changing 30 days out of the month, right? We're not little men. So it was through that process, right? And I think of, like, worst time, like, it was horrible. I remember going to conferences, like, having no energy. My adrenals had tanked with this. But the guys finally looking at me saying, oh my God, you're so sexy. You look amazing. And I even now, I
feel amazing.
Oh my God, I felt horrible. And I wanted to punch them in the gut. And it's one of those things, like, even within the chiropractic community, like, I will walk up to these guys now saying, do you realize, like, I talk about you all the time because it makes me so angry. But it was the fact of, like, I had to go through that to realize, like, all of this stuff. And it even started, like, it was one of my best friends. I remember it was like November of 2015, we're at a conference, and huge name in chiropractic. She looked at me. She's like, I understand why I'm overweight, Lisa, but what's wrong with you? She's like, I see what you eat. I see how hard you work out. Why are you not a size 0? And that's the first thing I realized. Oh, something's wrong with my body. So 2 months later, I decided to basically, in essence, starve myself, which was not good. So
can we go there for a moment for the listener? So when you say starve yourself, obviously, well, first, let me say, you grew your hair back. So for those of you who cannot see Lisa,
all hair. Yeah, it's really gross right today.
So there's hope. She did get her hair and her health back. And she's drinking out of a Wonder Woman cup, which is hilarious. That's great.
I love it. Yeah, it's my favorite cup.
But let's go back to why this failed specifically. So, and I can chime in on this as well. But So what was happening when you were starving yourself? So why do you think you literally lost your hair?
Okay. So you will love it because of what you're doing every day. Right. I was the perfect storm. Looking at it, I was that stressed out woman. I was on an airplane every single weekend doing something. So stress was crazy. I was sleeping, but that's the beauty of 2020, right? When I stopped traveling, listening to your intro, I was like, oh, that's not me anymore. But, you know, I'm not jumping on an airplane to have dinner in Tokyo anymore, but that was who I was at that time period. And I was like, oh, my adrenals are a little stressed. Well, no wonder. Yeah, they were, but it was also the fatigue of travel. It was the stress of that. My gut was not healthy. So then the microbiome was a mess.
Sure.
Looking at toxicity, and then all of a sudden, not only like I was doing lower fat, I was doing lower calories, I was not nourishing my body. And this is in essence how I always tell women this. I'm like, if you're not feeding yourself, which I wasn't, even the one meal a day, that's a huge thing that people do now, like not awesome for women. Your body innately goes back to how we were in Paleolithic era, right? Like, oh, hey, Lisa, guess what? You're not feeding yourself enough food for yourself. Why in the world do you think you could ever get pregnant right now? We better stop your hormones so you don't get pregnant because you can't build a baby at this point. So, it was one thing, multitude of things, not one thing. It was a perfect storm.
So you do need hormones to grow hair. If your testosterone, if your androgens are too high, you can lose hair. But all in all, you need hormones to grow hair. I have postmenopausal women all the time who we give estrogen, their hair starts growing back. Like they need hormones. So stress robs you of hormones. Doing too aggressive, it sounds like too aggressive of intermittent fasting robs you of hormones because it leaves you nutritionally deficient, and you need nutrients flow for hormones, but also to grow your hair. You need fats, right? You need those essential fatty acids. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is that you were trying to do the right thing, but you had been listening to a lot of male bloggers. So you were doing fasting wrong from a female perspective. So tell our listeners what you've learned. So why is intermittent fasting and also ketogenic eating, which I know you've been on a keto diet as well, different for women?
And it is, like I just said, we are not little men, right? Our hormones are changing 30 days out of the month, 28 days out of the month, however many days our cycle is. And so we need to be able to do that. And like I had just said, even if we're in menopause, it's still the fact, like we need to eat for our bodies. And so the fact is if we are always doing like the one meal a day, which works amazing for men, right? Like doing a 22-hour fast or a 20-hour fast, which is what I was doing, and basically having a very small, like 4-hour eating window. Yeah. A guy can sit down there and eat like 2,000-3,000 calories at once, right? First off, what woman is going to do that? But then it's also, like I said, it sends that signal to the body saying, okay, we have to go back to fasting in Paleolithic era. It was time periods of feast. It was time periods of famine. And so fasting is kind of mimicking that famine time period, which, hey, we're not sure when the next time is that we're going to have bountiful food.
Right.
So let's kind of stop everything. And so it's also, I do keto differently. Every woman is different. We actually strategically eat carbs at certain time periods. Depending on at where they are in their cycle. We do a lot of different things that way, where, people are like, you eat carbs. And I'm like, yeah, we want to knock ourselves out of ketosis. Again, I always go back to the feast and famine time period because we are still the same as like our caveman ancestors were. It's just, we never have famine time periods in America anymore.
Literally ever. Right.
Plentiful all the time.
So I know you have specifically a 3-tiered or 3-pronged approach to ketogenic living. That's why I should say it. Yeah. That you've used. So can you tell us what those 3 prongs are? Let's kind of go through that for the listeners.
Yeah. And you probably see a lot of times where patients will be like, or even clients are just out, you hear it all the time. Like I just ran through Costco to pick up some stuff. There's keto stuff everywhere. They have ketoized everything. Right.
Yeah.
So, people are like, oh yeah, I've done the keto thing, or I tried it once. It didn't work for me. Or I did it. I gave up after the first day. It was too hard to cut down to 20 grams of carbs. So my first thing is let's build an awareness. Let's find out how many grams of carbs somebody is actually intaking every day. Because some person, one person might be taking in 100 grams, another person might be taking 300 or 400 grams. We don't know how many grams of carbs. It just depends on if you have been a potato and bread and sandwich like person your whole life, it's going to be a lot different than somebody that grew up like, hey, with more like steak and salads or whatever their life. You know what I mean? So we got become that awareness. And then we're going to start to taper the carbs, because that's when I see people fail. Hey, I went down to 20 grams of carbs. I couldn't deal with it. I'm done. I've tried keto once. It didn't work for me. Right? Like, how often, I know you have new patients that come in all the time. I do too, where they sit across the desk from me saying, I tried this. I tried this. I tried this. This just isn't for me. I am destined to be sick. And it's like, well, no, I don't think any of us really truly think we're going to be sick forever, but healthy people didn't get to where they were overnight. And it's a baby step. And that's my whole philosophy is healthy living simple. It's one simple step built upon another. So that's the first thing. We've got to taper our carbs.
So awareness as far as what your carb intake is, and then taper the carbs. Okay. So that's number one. Okay.
That's the first one. And so ideally, we'll get down to less than 20 grams of carbs, get into ketosis, and then you build up that tolerance. Like, hey, can your body tolerate 50 grams of carbs each day and still stay in ketosis? Can you go up to 100? Like, where are you? But that's a long-term thing, right? Like first 30 days we're looking at, let's start tapering. The next one is to build our fasting muscle. So I know I just said, like, let's look at the fasting. We don't want to do 24 hours of fasting, ladies. You don't want to, I mean, once in a while is fine, not 7 days a week, right?
Right. But
a lot of times there's people that wake up in the middle of the night to eat. Like, I didn't realize that until I started talking to people. I'm like, oh yeah, I get up and have a snack at midnight. I'm like, really? Like I'm out. So it's, if we're constantly eating, or if we're eating every 2 to 3 hours, as the grazers we've been taught to do also, we're constantly increasing and decreasing blood sugar, like all throughout the day. And so we just want to help stabilize that. So I always want to see if, like, hey, can we start fasting for like a 10-hour window, and then building that up, and then on occasion doing a longer fast, but not doing that every single day for 30 days, always constantly changing. I like to keep the body guessing, right? Not so it's always completely the same. And then third thing, like I said earlier, is I also teach women, let's eat some carbs to knock us out of ketosis. So that way, again, it's that signal to your body to say, hey, we are not in famine. Like, there is bounty right now. We are plentiful. So we're not constantly in that state of, I don't want to say starvation. That's not what it is, but in that famine time period, right? Sure. We want to let the body know food is plentiful. We're okay. And then you get right back into ketosis.
Okay. So prong 2 was building the fasting muscle. Yeah. And then prong 3 was cycling the carbs. So I'm wondering, as far as this prong is concerned, and I know listeners can dive into your courses and learn tons more. I have not personally done the ketogenic diet. And so I almost feel like we just dove into this. Obviously, I know what it is, and I've advised it to my patients. I actually haven't done it. So I feel like we should rewind for a moment and talk about what it is for the listeners. And then I have a question as far as, briefly, if we could go through the menstrual cycle, like week 1, 2, 3, and 4, if you can advise tips on what weeks you should be fasting or which weeks you shouldn't be fasting for as long of a duration, when we can have more carbs, when we should have fewer carbs, if we could kind of walk through the menstrual cycle. But let's go back, since we kind of got ahead of ourselves, and define what a ketogenic diet is for the listeners. We've talked a lot about intermittent fasting on the podcast, but we really haven't delved into keto.
Yeah. So keto, like, if you think of it, people a lot of times are like, oh, this is a new thing. And it's not really. You think of Atkins back in like the late 90s, he was doing keto, but to be honest, like it's how our ancestors ate. What happens? Ketosis is that time period of a lower food expenditure, basically, your food intake. It's when your body is using fat for fuel. And so therefore you are burning that fat, because we can be sugar burners or we can be fat burners. I'll take it back a step there. In the United States, we're typically all sugar burners, where carbohydrates are the majority of our diet. We learn to burn carbohydrates. Our body does not know how to burn ketones or burn fat. So what happens, every single organ of your body absolutely loves ketones. It thrives on ketones. Babies are born in a state of ketosis, right? Mother's milk is high in MCT oils. It's a medium chain triglycerides. It's to help grow the brain, right? So babies are in the state of ketosis. The biggest brain growth that we have, right, is during that baby time period. So you think of it, it's kind of a natural state. And so the only organ that does not utilize ketones because it makes ketones is the liver. So when we are burning fat for fuel, that's how keto, the diet, gets into that thought process of, oh, this is a great way to lose weight, to lose fat. is because we are tapping into those fuel stores, which are those fat stores. That being said, in order to get into that ketogenic state, we have to limit our carbohydrates. Typically, like Atkins was always like less than 20 grams of carbs each day. So like I said, if you're a 400 gram per carb each day person, and all of a sudden you're going to 20, what's happening in your brain and your body is like, you have been using sugar for your fuel your entire life, and you just stopped the fuel intake. And so it happens is this is when people will hear and say, oh, I've heard of that keto flu. It was miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Like not the fact of like the actual physical flu, but it's like, hey, there's brain fog. I have no energy. Like all of it.
Yeah,
exactly. And so it's because you just robbed the body of fuel that it was used to. It's not ready to switch over yet. Usually it takes a couple of days, but once they get there, they always talk about a brain clarity that people notice. And that's because you're utilizing those ketones. So yeah. And so it is great. People get into ketosis. And then as you get more like fat adapted, your body is utilizing that fat easier. That's when you can increase the carbohydrates a little bit. And so your body's like, oh, I know what this is. And then you can burn carbs and you can flip back over and burn fat. Right. So it's that fat adaptation.
I think that's so important. I guess, pet peeve I have with individuals who are experimenting with different diets is that they go on this one diet and they never waver. And then your body just gets so used to that then you can plateau. So I think it is important, like you said, to wax, I don't want to say wax and wane, but decrease and then increase the hours from a fasting standpoint, and decrease and increase your carb intake. So I think that I like that. So let's talk about the menstrual cycle. So how can women best be eating for ultimate weight loss and health and longevity, right? Every week of their cycle, or every week of the cycle. So in a 28 day, we'll just assume women have a regular 28-day cycle. Day one is the first day of bleeding, right? So obviously your body is losing iron, losing a lot of nutrients. A lot of patients feel very anemic and tired this week. So how should we be eating to nurture our bodies starting with week one of the cycle?
And you just said it. Let's look at some higher iron foods, looking at the red meats to help increase what we're losing at that time period. And it's interesting because I went through and I did the Women Virtual Summit a couple years ago now. I don't even know. And it's funny how every single woman has their own different perspective. Like, how do we work out? And it was funny as I went through this, some women are like, this is the week of relaxing. This is the week where you just kind of allow your body to do more yoga poses and more calming poses and that. And then other women are walking in and saying, this is the week you hit the weights hard. And I was like, all right. And everybody had their own science behind it. So truly, I think every woman is different, right? And we have to kind of honor that. I think most women will realize the first few days of your period, we're a little more sleepy too, right? At least I notice that my energy's lower. So am I lifting a ton of heavy weights no, I'm just kind of doing more relaxing type stuff, right? So
you don't want to start a 3-day fast day one of your cycle. That would really be not wise decision.
No. And
I would assume you need nutrition, especially these days. So you would maybe not want to fast for super long periods of time this week. That's my assumption.
Right. And so, and it's different. And again, I will say to women, pay attention when you crave carbs. This is where I love the men. As I say this and with my eyes rolling, I've had some guys on, they're like, women need to eat carbs the week before their period. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, why? Because that's when my wife craves carbs, that's what the guys will say. And I'm like, okay, so what about the women that craves carbs during ovulation? Right? Because I feel it's different for each of us. And so again, as a chiropractor, I'm always following our own innate and our own intuition because we are so brilliant, right? We just have to honor and respect that of the body, to be honest. So what I find, you can see women from ovulation through right before they bleed. It's different for every woman. Some are craving carbs at different time periods, and it's okay. It's okay to have that. I'm not giving you the free pass to do 200, 300, 400 grams of carbs, but it's okay to increase of good quality carbs, like a sweet potato, 50 to 100 grams. So
let's differentiate that good carbs from bad carbs. And listeners, roughly, you've mentioned this kind of 20, which I know it's different for each person, but 20 gram carb day. What is 20 grams of carbs? For an example.
That's when you have to start really looking at things. And I always tell people, I use my FitnessPal, even now, I'll go through and track, but people don't realize an apple would be 25 grams of carbs. So,
wow. Wow.
So it can be really low.
You gotta
Like
choose
yeah. And it's one of those things, like one of our colleagues, like one of our mutual friends, like JJ Virgin is like, this is an all or nothing thing, like this is sugar, like you got to cut it all and go cold turkey. We totally can do that. Like I used to be that person telling everybody, but I found more people failed and they just walked away. So I'm like, okay, we can do that. I understand, like sugar is addictive, right? We know that when you look at it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like you look at rats and the areas of the brain that it lights up is the same areas of cocaine. Like we know sugar is addictive. It would be best to go cold turkey. That being said, it is such a quote unquote acceptable part of our life. I want people to truly be healthy. I don't want them sick at 50 years old saying, wow, how did I end up this way? I always wanted to feel lousy. I'm so glad I accomplished that. Nobody does that, right? So I know I'm kind of all over right now.
No, that's okay. This is all great. So let me come back to, obviously we were just at a conference together and, when the guacamole came out, we, instead of having the chips, we asked for some vegetables to dip into that. And I wasn't even thinking in my head, like, I wonder how many carbs these vegetables are, but can I ask you, like, what are your carbs that you're choosing, like to hit your 20 grams or whatnot?
Like 20 grams. So I'm going to really throw you for a loop right now.
Or maybe you're not having any
right now. So I'm like zero carb.
Let's come back to that. But when you were not doing carnivore.
No, when I was not doing carnivore.
Yeah.
So like carrots and those things, to be honest, I'm not at 20 grams anymore. My body, I can easily be between 50 and 100 and I'm still in ketosis. Like I have laughed with some of the guys in my profession because we'll all be out at conferences. And I was like, yeah, I will send you my ketone meter on Monday morning. And they're like, seriously? And one of the guys was like, that's super. I was like 1.1 after a long conference out, like doing all sorts of stuff. I'm like, my body but I've been doing keto now for how many years? Like it's a long time. So, the one thing that I do realize when people cut out the sugar out of their diet, and I love it because even back in the day, remember Whole30, we were using that in our practice too. Mm-hmm. And patients would walk in and say, I never realized how sweet a carrot was. Or like, you know what I mean? But you can start tasting the sugar that's in those vegetables. Yep. And so that's the thing. Like, yeah, I want you, if you are looking at like a potato chip or a carrot to eat for your carbohydrates, I would much rather have the carrot. I'm not going to stress out over the carbohydrates on that. Right. And so from the veggies, we're going to be A-okay. Super strict keto would say, take out any of those. You know what? Like carrots are going to be fine. I'm okay with berries, right? I'm okay with the blueberries. I'm okay with blackberries, raspberries, as long as you're not eating like the whole big old bag from Costco or something. Right. Like we're not doing that.
Totally.
So it is like the serving size.
You've probably used a lot of different brands of meters in the past. Who are you currently using? Like, what's your favorite meter?
My favorite. Oh, I got a good story on this one. You'll love it. I used to use, I'm not going to name the name. But I would do these numbers and I'm like, how is my fasting blood sugar is 100. I'm like, this is crazy. This should not be. So this was years ago. And I remember talking to my colleagues, like my friends, I'm like, this is insane. They're like, no, that's not right. It's not right. There's something going on. And then I got a Keto Mojo meter and fasting blood sugar was like where it should be, right? Like low 80s. I was like, okay, I'm happy. This one's much better. But how is there such a variation between the two meters? Oh, guess what? Keto Mojo. I found it in reading all their little things. They're amazing. I love them. I've interviewed them on my podcast.
That's the one we have. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you realize the FDA allows like a 20% error rate? I just sat there thinking people give insulin on this. I mean, you know what I mean? Like I was sitting there reading at 100 on a fasting blood sugar. That's insane. Right? Like we know anything over 90 skyrockets with the risk of Alzheimer's. So for me, I was really concerned where other people are like, oh, but my medical doctor says that's fine. Well, no, I want really good. I want my blood sugar really good.
Keto Mojo, you like the company. My husband has used that meter because he's done keto. So they check glucose and ketones in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Let's go back to the menstrual cycle for a minute. Maybe you've already covered this, but as far as we kind of talked about week 1, when patients are more nutritionally deficient because they're heavily bleeding and whatnot. So really, maybe that's not the week to aggressively taper back on carbs or fasting. But as we proceed through the month, I guess you tell me which weeks you're more comfortable being more aggressive.
I am okay being, not like maybe a 10-hour fast at that time period.
Sure.
Right. 12-hour fast is fine. And I really I'm that person that I will pull a 24-hour fast maybe once a week. And that's when I'm going I'm doing that really consistently. Now it's like once a month. They don't do that often.
But with water, you drink lots of water.
Yeah, lots of water. And I do black coffee. I always tell people that's my vice, but I do really super clean, organic black coffee.
You do electrolytes too when you're fasting? Yeah.
Yeah. I love the LMNT stuff.
Me
right?
too. Yeah, that's what we sell.
Yeah.
Love those.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
sorry, back to answering the question.
yeah. So I really think it's going to vary for each woman. Like, I know like you can pull different people and they all will say, first week, go ahead, strict fasting, lots of good meat, blah, 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 blah. And again, like you just said, if we're trying to nourish the body, I guess it also depends on how depleted that person is, right? Because if it's a woman that's still trying to build and nourish, we don't want to go. But if this woman has been building and nourishing for years, she might be easier to be able to pull a strong fast, right? So I really think like, what is the foundation that we're working with already? So I try to make things simple for them.
Tell me, so I guess maybe I'm being the devil's advocate here though, but who shouldn't do keto or intermittent fasting? Like who's just not a good candidate for that?
I think if somebody's been a total grazer forever, if you're up in the middle of the night all the time, like you really want to do this, but it's going to be difficult to start. Right. Yeah. So my first thing I always just tell people, like, it's all baby steps. I don't think there's people that are not going to be good at doing this. I think it's beneficial for everybody, but to the extent of how strict am I jumping straight in, like it's going to be more difficult for somebody that has had that roller coaster of blood sugar their entire life, but they need to start it. Right. Because we understand what's happening if their fasting blood sugar is a certain number or whatever. So my easy baby steps are, let's just stop eating after dinner and not eat until breakfast.
Yeah.
I mean, you can easily pull 8 to 10 hours at that point. And maybe that's the first step. But then after that, like, let's look at a 12-hour fast. And then we can slowly start building up, like maybe eliminating breakfast every once in a while. And when you do breakfast, not doing as a higher carbohydrate breakfast of like cereal and milk, but what if we're looking more at like bacon and eggs?
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Totally. So I know you have a lot of resources. Tell us, I still have a few more questions for you, but on this topic, tell us about like courses that you've created. Like if listeners are thinking they want to dive further into this, what resources maybe can you offer them or refer them to?
Yes, no, I have a 3-day intro to keto course, which actually is a 4-day intro to keto course that they can do where they're like, okay, what is this? How do I start? That's a super easy one. I have a 30-day blueprint that is a whole group coaching program that we do for, 30 days where we go through and we kind of, I don't want to say we're working one-on-one. We're not doing that, but it's a group program that we all get to work with. And it's cool to be able to see what happens in those 30 days, right? Like how long does it take to change a habit, right? Usually they say like 28 days or whatever. My God. And we've also done virtual summits. I did a whole keto virtual summit that is always available as well. And those links are all over on my website too.
Just drlisao.com.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also hear you have a free gift.
I do over there. I have another, like my keto blueprint guide. That's not the 30-day course. So the keto blueprint guide is about like 40, 50 page book, like a little ebook of all sorts of information on keto. But for those people that say, oh, that's a lot. I also have a checklist that you can just go to, like a cheat sheet checklist that's over there too.
Awesome. Obviously I love blueprints. I wrote the book, Your Longevity Blueprint, of course. So I love blueprints. I think those are just easy for patients to kind of understand. So I think if you're listening and this is something that very much piques your interest, visit drlisao.com for her free blueprint. I want to go back though to just asking your thoughts on self-acceptance as a woman. So we kind of opened your story. You just weren't comfortable in your shoes, right? You were self-conscious, whatnot. So through this transformation and you kind of figuring out how is the best way, for you to eat, whatnot. How have you more accepted yourself? Like, what are your thoughts on that topic in general?
Oh my gosh. I think it's something every woman struggles with if we're honest, right? Like, I feel like maybe every man does too. I don't know, but I feel like it's something definitely as women, because we're giving to everybody, whether we're a mom or not, right? Like we have a mothering nature of us to give to everybody else. And it's one of those things I've had to do a lot, like whether it's EFT tapping or whatever to be there. Am I 100%? Absolutely not. Right. Like I've had a couple different like health things just throw at me like recently that I'm like, wait a minute, like, but it made sense to me now as to what was going on. And I just have to be a-okay with where I am because it's this evolution of who we are becoming all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah. Totally. And I mean, we're all meant here for a purpose, right? So we have to be okay with it. And I've been talking to people so much about that. It's like faith over fear.
Yes.
And it's so much easier. Yes. So
more than ever before.
Yeah.
And listen to Lisa's podcast if you want to hear more on that. She doesn't hold back.
It's kind of inadvertently gone that way, but yeah, it's so amazing. And then the guests that reach out to me to be on this show, and then the conversations we have behind the scenes, I'm like, whoa.
Well, I've enjoyed listening to them. What is your top longevity tip? I ask all of my guests at the end of the show what their top longevity tip is. I know it's hard to pick one, but if you had to.
Oh my gosh, right out of all of them, gosh, I keep going between sleep and gratitude. They're both so good. You know what? Oh man, can you be happy well without being, let's just look at gratitude. I'm going to take that one. Even though sleep is so important to everything of our body. And I think people don't understand the importance of sleep, but gratitude, it's starting every day in a grateful state, even when you got everything being thrown at you and 100% whatever thing. Grateful that, I'm awake this morning. I'm grateful for every little thing. And I think because that sets the tone, the vibration, and everything on health too, right? I mean, you think of, was Emoto's, what was his first name? Emoto's work with the water crystals. You remember that this was maybe 15 years ago. I want to say it's Mario Emoto, but he had children speak kind words to a glass of water, and he had children speak ugly words to a glass of water, and then tested the crystals. And that of the ugly words were just horrible, ugly crystals versus these beautiful crystals that formed with all the positive words. So again, thinking back.
Think about not just water, but your body, yourself.
Yes,
what speaking negatively to yourself would do. Yes. Oh, I love that. Lisa, I forgot to go back to carnivore. Do you have time for one more question?
Oh, I do. Yeah.
I was going to wrap up the show, but I also have not had anyone come on the show talk about carnivore diet. So yes. Are you experimenting just like for fun to kind of see, or
I did. I did that in 2019 because people started talking about it. I'm like, that is not good for you. That cannot be good for you, right? Like you need to have greens. You've got to have alkalinity. Like I just sat there like, that is not possible. It cannot be good for you. So then I started
listening to my initial response when I think, that's exactly what
absolutely. I was right there. And then I started noticing there were some really like brilliant MDs and just not even MDs. There were just a lot of holistic people that were doing carnivore. And I was like, they know something I don't. Like, so I just started digging. So here's like the theory behind it. Like, do I do it 24/7, 365 days a year? No. Like right now I'm doing it for a whole nother reason. But the first time I did it in 2019, I eliminated it because my biggest aha was if you think of plants versus animals, if animals are under attack, they're going to be killed. They're going to run away, right? Like they have that to happen. A plant can't get up and run away. And so it will secrete different things like phytic acids, like those type of things. And all of a sudden when I started hearing that, I was like, well, if you follow paleo for a while, you eliminate all these certain things because of the phytic acids. You eliminate the lectins, you eliminate those things out, right? And so I was like, oh, well, those are what's contributing to autoimmunity or whatever it is.
Do we know if those things are contributing? I mean,
there's a lot, how about that? There's a lot of theories of that, right? That can cause to that. Like, and you think of like people that stay away from nightshade vegetables, all those things.
Yep.
So, I decided to do it. And it's also a great way just to test food sensitivities too. Right.
Sure.
So at that
point, and go off.
Right. And so initially I was like, well, I want to see, cause I was using a lot of coconut, just coconut oil, coconut milk, that type of stuff. And I'm like, I'm curious if I'm allergic to that, or if I'm also allergic to eggs. Those were my two. So I seriously for 2 weeks only did like beef. And I couldn't believe the energy I had. I couldn't believe the clarity I had. And then as I slowly incorporated things back in, and why I decided to is I could not get out of ketosis. Like it was ridiculous.
Wow.
I had like a full sweet potato and I was still in ketosis. And I'm like, okay, this is crazy. I've got to be able to knock myself out. So, but that was how I just did my food sensitivities that way. So it's the same thing. Like I just, like seeing certain numbers that typically like, let's use the example of thyroid antibodies, right? If those are super high, a lot of times they'll tell the women typically, because are the ones with low thyroid issues, right? Eliminate gluten out of your diet. Well, if that person's already eliminated all gluten, what else can we look at? Well, lectins will do the same thing. Like there are certain things that will increase.
Other triggers.
Yeah. So right now I was like, you know what? It's been a while since I've done carnivore. I'm going to do it again.
I should try that. My husband keeps telling me I should try that. I do, for the listeners, I will say this, that I would like to bring someone on the show. We'll do a whole episode on keto, or I'm sorry, we just did. No. Well, carnivore diet. But I will say this, before you just jump into it, I think it is very important to say that if you're going to consider something like that, you do need to eat nose to tail. So eat organs of animals. It's not just like, I know you said you did beef for a while, right? You got to eat more than that. So if you are considering something like this, talk to a practitioner who can advise you on how to really transition to a carnivore diet.
Yeah, no, because I do a lot of the bone broth, and I do a lot of other stuff too. And I have my glandular capsules, to be honest, because I'm that person that's just, I can't fix organ meat. I just
and there are companies that even encapsulate that. And I actually have a guest coming up on the show to talk about pluck seasoning. That's an organ-based seasoning. We're going to talk about that in a few episodes, actually before this episode will launch. But awesome. We'll wrap up the show because we did go a lot of directions, but this was a lot of fun. So I think the listeners will have enjoyed that. So thank you, Dr. Lisa, for coming on the show and sharing why we as women need this personalized approach to weight loss as far as using ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting. And thanks for your energy and passion to make healthy living simple. So thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.